They didn't break you. They broke themselves. And now they carry the weight of that destruction every single day. You may still feel the sting of betrayal, the echoes of words never apologized for, and the shadow of choices that weren't yours to bear. But hear this loud and clear. What they did says everything about them and nothing about your worth. Today, we're going deep into the psychology of guilt, accountability, and healing. Because the pain you feel doesn't belong to you, and it's time to give it back. When someone is in deep psychological conflict, when their internal world is cracking under pressure, they don't usually collapse quietly. People don't unravel in isolation. They unravel outward. They lash out. They look for places to deposit the chaos they can't regulate. And tragically, those deposits often land in the laps of people who least deserve it. People like you. People who tried to care. Who tried to understand. But understanding was never the cure, was it? You have to realize that the moment someone begins projecting their emotional instability onto you, manipulating, demeaning, provoking, what they are really doing is begging, in a very unconscious and destructive way, to avoid their own confrontation with themselves. Because facing yourself is excruciating, far more difficult than blaming someone else, far more terrifying than admitting, I am the problem. But here's the brutal truth. Most people aren't willing to do the hard work of self-reflection. They'd rather scapegoat the one person who tried to love them with patience. The one person who forgave them again and again. Why? Because your steadiness highlighted their instability. Your emotional maturity cornered their immaturity. Your consistency threatened the fragile walls of self-deceit they spent years constructing. So they had to destroy the mirror. Not because the mirror was flawed, but because it reflected back something they couldn't stand to look at. Now, if you've internalized their destruction, if you're carrying their actions like proof that you weren't enough, stop. You were not the battlefield. You were simply where the war was fought. And you need to understand that not everyone is fighting for truth, or healing, or honesty. Some people are fighting to preserve their illusion of innocence at any cost, even if it means sacrificing the very people who stood beside them. Even if it means rewriting history to make themselves the victim of the pain they caused. That is not your fault. You see, when people destroy a good thing, when they obliterate love, trust, or safety with recklessness, cruelty, or abandonment, they may walk away with a smirk. They may appear indifferent, cold, victorious even. But that's not the end of the story. The real story begins in the silence that follows. When the distraction of blame wears off. When the noise of external validation quiets. When it's 2:37 a.m. and there's no one left to lie to. That's when guilt arrives. And guilt is not some poetic justice. It's a psychological reckoning. It's what happens when the unconscious finally gets loud enough to disturb the sleep of the willfully ignorant. You cannot run from your conscience indefinitely. You can silence it, bury it under addiction or new relationships or work. But eventually, it surfaces. It shows up in sleepless nights, in broken trust with others, in the inability to feel joy, in self-sabotaging behavior that no one understands. That's the toll guilt demands. And it is brutal, relentless, especially when the harm was never owned, especially when apologies were never made. But here's where it gets more complicated. And this is something most people don't want to admit. Guilt doesn't always produce change. It can, but it often doesn't. Because guilt is painful, and pain, again, is something people want to avoid. So instead of repenting, they rewrite the story. They double down on the lies. They become bitter, hardened, and emotionally unavailable, not just to others, but to themselves. They convince themselves that you were too much, too sensitive, too needy. Because if they admitted the truth, that you were loyal, loving, and deeply wounded, they'd have to face what they did with that gift. And some people simply aren't ready to carry the weight of their own actions. So they walk around pretending they feel nothing, when in reality, they feel everything. But that everything has been trapped, locked inside a room in their psyche, labeled "Do Not Enter." You cannot fix this for them. You cannot feel guilty because they now live in a prison of their own making. Because the reality is, they destroyed something beautiful. And now guilt owns them, Not because you demanded it, but because life demands it. The human soul cannot remain untouched when it violates another. There are consequences that no courtroom, no friend group, and no social media echo chamber can erase. And yet here you are, still questioning your worth. Still wondering if you were the cause. Still waiting for someone to validate your suffering when deep down, you already know the truth. You know that your intentions were pure. That your heart was genuine. That you stood in the fire longer than anyone could reasonably expect, and still got burned for it. So let's be clear. What they did was not about you. It was about them. Their inability to regulate their emotions. Their fear of intimacy. Their unresolved trauma. Their refusal to grow up, to step into the terrifying world of responsibility. You just happened to be the one close enough to get scorched. And if you're still carrying the blame, if you're still replaying their decisions as if they were reflections of your inadequacy, stop. Let them carry what's theirs. Let them face the echo of their choices in the solitude they tried to avoid. Because guilt has a long memory. And the longer someone avoids it, the louder it knocks. There's this lie we tell ourselves when someone has deeply wounded us, that we can heal in the same place we were broken. That if we wait long enough, if we're patient enough, if we prove ourselves enough, they'll come back. They'll apologize. They'll see the damage. They'll finally acknowledge our pain and hold it like we held theirs. But that's a fantasy rooted not in strength, but in a kind of desperation, an unwillingness to let go of a story where the ending gets rewritten to satisfy our longing for justice, or even just recognition. But let's speak plainly. You can't heal where the wound keeps being reopened. You can't mend in the same environment that tore you apart and called it love. And yet so many people stay. Not because they're weak, but because they are afraid of the void that comes after. The silence. The uncertainty. The loss of potential. Because you didn't just lose a person, you lost the imagined future. And grief over what could have been is a powerful tether. But here's the psychological truth. Remaining in that space, mentally or physically, suspends your development. It halts your movement toward wholeness. You are psychologically locked in a loop of false hope and unacknowledged reality. You keep replaying the same scene, rewriting the dialogue in your head, imagining a different outcome, but the facts never change. They left, or they lied, or they shattered something sacred and refused to name it. And every time you go back, even if just in thought, you abandon the present moment. You sacrifice the life that's trying to unfold right now in favor of one that already collapsed. The idea that closure will come when they finally say the right thing, do the right thing, show up the right way. It's seductive, but it's a trap. Because that belief puts your peace in the hands of someone who already proved they were careless with it. Closure isn't a door they open for you. It's a decision you make when you finally accept that what happened, happened. And no amount of wishing or rewriting will alter the truth. When you step away from the place where you were wounded, you begin to see the damage clearly. You begin to grieve properly. And that grief, as agonizing as it is a kind of medicine. It signals that you are alive to your own reality again. That you're no longer anesthetizing yourself with false hope. That you're choosing truth over fantasy, even when that truth hurts. That is the beginning of real healing. But many people don't want to go through that process, so they stay emotionally tethered to the person who hurt them. They check in on them. They wonder if they're okay. They analyze their social media posts for signs of regret. It becomes a kind of psychological surveillance state, driven by the unconscious need for reassurance that the pain meant something. But again, it's a trap, because you can't move forward while you're still looking over your shoulder. And here's the dangerous part. When that guilt finally starts to seep into the person who caused the harm, it often doesn't look like remorse. It looks like defensiveness, denial, gaslighting. They don't want to carry the guilt, so they start twisting the narrative to offload it back onto you. They'll say you were too emotional, too sensitive, too much. Because if they admit you were hurt, they'd have to confront that they did the hurting. And that's too heavy for most people to carry unless they've done the work to be able to bear it. That's why you can't romanticize their regret. You can't make their silence mean more than it does. Just because someone feels guilty doesn't mean they'll become who you needed them to be. Guilt is not transformation. Guilt is the spark. But most people snuff it out before it can ignite anything real. Because real transformation requires a dismantling of the ego. It demands an admission that I failed you. I failed myself. And that is terrifying. It takes extraordinary strength to say those words and mean them. Most people can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And yet there you are, waiting for the apology. Fantasizing about the day they call. The day they cry. The day they finally get it. But what are you really hoping for? Are you hoping to be chosen again? Or are you hoping to feel like you mattered? Because if it's the latter, let me say this. Your worth is not defined by whether someone regrets losing you. That's not proof of your value. That's proof of their blindness. You mattered the whole time. You just kept offering your heart to someone who wasn't ready or willing to receive it. You must stop confusing guilt with redemption. Just because someone feels bad doesn't mean they'll do better. Some people stay stuck in guilt for years, and instead of turning it into growth, they turn it into bitterness, resentment, or worse, they weaponize it. They make you feel like their guilt is your fault. And that's not love. That's not growth. That's not your burden to carry. When you stop romanticizing their regret, you finally start facing your own life. You begin to feel the weight of your own potential, your own voice, your own power. You step out of the role of the martyr and into the role of the survivor. You begin to understand that healing doesn't require their return. It requires your release. There is a point in a person's life, especially in the wake of profound betrayal, where they have to sit with a brutal realization that their compassion, their tenderness, their loyalty was not just misunderstood or taken for granted, but outright exploited. And that changes something in you. It ruptures the internal narrative that says, if I just love enough, if I just stay kind, if I just keep understanding them, they'll come around. Because the truth is, some people don't come around. Some people will take everything you offer, everything beautiful and generous and good, and they will twist it. Not because you're unworthy of love, but because they don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to receive what they themselves cannot give. Compassion is one of the most powerful forces in the human psyche. It's rooted in the capacity to see the pain in others and respond to it with grace, not judgment. And in its healthiest form, it creates connection, safety, and intimacy. But when that compassion is placed in the hands of someone who is emotionally immature or manipulative or deeply self-centered, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a currency for control. It becomes a loophole through which they escape accountability. You keep giving more because you believe your goodness can fix them, that your patience will make them better, that if you stay calm while they rage, if you explain while they blame, if you give space when they withdraw, you'll finally earn the love you deserve. But that's not how it works. You don't earn love through suffering. You don't prove your worth by enduring mistreatment. That isn't love. That's emotional codependency. That's self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. And it's not your fault that you ended up in that place. You were trying to make sense of chaos through kindness. You were trying to regulate their emotional world by sacrificing your own. But there comes a time, and it is a painful, soul-wrenching time, when you have to look at yourself in the mirror and ask, why am I always the one bending? Why do I keep handing my heart to people who don't know how to hold it? And the answer is devastating, because somewhere you believe that being loved required suffering. You learned, perhaps early in life, that love wasn't safe. That attachment came with pain. And so you developed a survival strategy: love harder. Be better. Be softer. And maybe then people will stay. Maybe then they won't hurt you. But people who are bent on avoiding their own growth will always hurt the ones closest to them. Not because you deserved it. Not because you failed. But because they are running from themselves. That's why your compassion must be guarded. Not withheld, but protected. Offered selectively. Because it is a sacred resource. And not everyone has earned the right to receive it. Especially not those who weaponize it against you. You need to understand that walking away isn't cruel. It's not cold. It's not vindictive. Sometimes, It's the most powerful declaration of self-respect you will ever make. And if you really want to know who someone is, don't watch how they treat you when you're giving them everything. Watch what they do when you finally stop. When you finally say, enough. There's a moment in every soul-crushing dynamic where the silent decision gets made. Not with fireworks, not with a dramatic exit, but with a kind of quiet resignation. A shift inside. The day you stop explaining. The day you stop hoping they'll get it. The day you stop making excuses for why they hurt you. That moment is sacred. It's the threshold between your old self and your new one. Between the version of you that tolerated pain for connection and the one that chooses peace instead. And here's what they never tell you. Leaving doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes the most transformative decisions are made in silence. You don't need to yell. You don't need to announce. You don't need to list the reasons. The power is in the absence. The absence of pleading. The absence of justification. The absence of emotional labor you no longer owe. When you walk away silently, you take back your power, not in an aggressive or performative way, but in a deeply psychological way. You refuse to be the stage for their drama. You refuse to be the container for their guilt. And that silence, that lack of engagement, it screams louder than any words ever could. Because people know. Deep down, they know what they did. And when the person who once absorbed all the chaos suddenly becomes unreachable, when the emotional sponge is no longer there to soak up their mess, they feel it. And for the first time, they're left alone with themselves. And for people who've never developed the capacity for introspection, that is a terrifying place to be. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You need clarity. And clarity often comes in solitude. In choosing not to explain your worth, not to prove your pain, not to beg for understanding. Because those who are capable of real connection wouldn't require that of you in the first place. You didn't lose your voice. You reclaimed it. By choosing silence. By choosing to exit without drama, without vengeance, without theatrics. That is a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind that rebuilds you from the inside out. The kind that says, I am no longer here to rescue you from yourself. I am here to rescue myself. There comes a point where the weight of memory begins to bend a person backward, where they can no longer stand upright in the present because they're too busy staring into a past that can't be changed. And for many people, that backward glance becomes a posture. It becomes their identity. They define themselves by what they lost, what they endured, who left, and who broke them. But here's the problem with that. When you live in the past, even just mentally, you stop being capable of engaging with the full complexity of the now. You become emotionally anchored to events that are no longer unfolding, but that still rule your internal landscape as if they are. And that is a tragedy. Not because remembering is wrong, but because living there is self-imprisonment. The past is a place of reference, not residence. It's where your pain was forged, yes, but also where your resilience took root. It's where you were mistreated, misjudged, perhaps even abandoned. But it's also where the version of you that's still standing was born. You're not meant to camp out there indefinitely, like a ghost haunting your own unfinished story. You're meant to look back with clarity, with honesty, and then move forward with purpose. There's a kind of psychological death that occurs when we fixate too long on what was. The possibilities of life narrow. Our language becomes fatalistic. I'll never trust again. I'll never find love again. I'm just too broken. But those are not truths. Those are conclusions written from the height of despair. And despair, by its very nature, distorts reality. It convinces you that because you were once powerless, you are permanently powerless. But that's not true. You are not who you were when the worst thing happened to you. You're not the same person who begged to be understood, or who tolerated what should have been unacceptable. You've changed. And if you're brave enough to acknowledge it, that change was growth, even if it came wrapped in agony. The hard part is letting go of the version of yourself who needed that past to turn out differently. That younger version of you, that more hopeful, more trusting, perhaps more naive self, was waiting for a different ending. And you carry that grief. You carry the ache of unfulfilled potential, of love that was real to you, even if it was never honored properly. But that's not where the story ends unless you let it be. That's not the totality of who you are. You are not simply a collection of wounds and regrets. You are also the capacity to rebuild, to reconnect, to renew. But you have to choose that. You have to stop dragging the past into every new chapter and expecting it to behave. You have to stop consulting your pain before making decisions, as if it's some kind of wise advisor. Pain is a signal, not a compass. It tells you where to look, not where to stay. And when you begin to live from that place, of conscious choice rather than unconscious reactivity, you begin to reclaim your life. You stop living as a victim of someone else's inability to love you. You stop filtering your value through the lens of what they did or didn't see in you. You begin to say, maybe I was never the problem. Maybe I was just waiting to grow into the kind of person who would never again tolerate being treated like one. And that leads to the final and perhaps most difficult truth. You are not defined by how they left. You are defined by how you rise. Because people will walk away. People will lie. People will fail you. And some of them will never look back. But what you do with their absence, that's your responsibility. That's your power. You can stay in that place of abandonment, replaying it endlessly in your mind, tying your identity to being the one who got hurt. Or you can rise, quietly, powerfully, without applause, without permission, without needing them to see it. Rising doesn't mean pretending you're fine. It means choosing not to let the pain dictate your entire narrative. It means saying, yes, they hurt me, but I won't hurt myself by staying stuck there. It's about deciding that their actions may have shaped you, but they will not limit you. That your life is still yours to live. And that maybe, just maybe, the deepest kind of revenge is not revenge at all. It's peace. It's joy. It's building a life so rooted in authenticity and strength that their memory becomes just one thread in a far larger, richer tapestry. Because the truth is, some people destroy what is good because they cannot handle goodness. And some people leave because they cannot stand to see themselves in the eyes of someone who truly sees them. That was never yours to fix. That was never yours to carry. You are not the sum of their leaving. You are the sum of your staying, with yourself, with your values, with your journey. The road ahead will ask more of you. It will demand courage. It will require patience. But it will also offer beauty that cannot be experienced by those still trapped in cycles of pain and denial. You have the right to move on. You have the right to love again. And more importantly, you have the right to be fully, unapologetically alive. Not in reaction to what they did, but in response to who you're becoming. It's not your burden to carry anymore. You've done enough. You've been enough. And now it's your turn to thrive. If this message hit home, if it stirred something inside you, talk to us in the comments. Your story matters. Your healing matters. Backhand index pointing right, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because someone out there needs this just as much as you did. And hey, drop a topic you'd like us to explore next. Let's grow this space together. One truth, one conversation, one breakthrough at a time. You survived what tried to destroy you. Now it's time to live like you know it. Speech balloon, sparkling heart.